Thank you so much for the follow, but yo, how we doing, bro? Welcome. I don't know if we've ever been in the same call together on Discord, but you know, it works out. I think actually maybe one time. But here we go. I think we're ready to start watching LEC and this at the same time. Nice. I think I only watch LEC's League of Legends, right? I think I've only watched it. I only watched it last the last grand final, like Worlds final. But yeah, so yesterday we went over Team Liquid. We came up with some individual weaknesses for each player. We came up with the weaknesses for the whole team. And then we came up with strengths for the whole team. So overall, Team Liquid, pretty solid team. But they remind me a lot of FaZe from last season. So today we're going to be going over G2 Esports. Tomorrow we'll go over Falcons. And the day after Crew. And the day after that OCE in KCP. And we're just going to keep going down that list. Just going through the different regions, and then by the time we're done with all this analysis, then I'll be posting a document on Twitter for everyone to be able to access, and they can just see how the teams fare going into the World Championship. So today we're looking at G2 Esports. Now last season, by the very end, they were probably considered the best in the world, if not the second best in the world behind BDS. And they sadly ended up losing at the World Championship. So the big thing we're going to be analyzing here with G2, we're going to be analyzing them after their last regional. They did really well. They ended up beating V1 in a Game 7. They swept Optic, and then they ended up losing to FaZe. So we're going to be looking at a couple things from G2. Just like yesterday, with Liquid, we looked at a group stage game, and then we looked at a quarterfinals game, a semifinals game, and then we looked at 3 games from the grand final. So we'll have a lot of information to draw from here with G2. And for those who are newer to these streams, we're going to be looking at a couple things from G2. So whenever we're analyzing teams, we're looking at to see if they have the basics down and see how consistent they are with them. So one basic is possession. We want to make sure, because in order to score in Rocket League, what do you need? You need to make sure that you are able to take the ball from point A to point B, but more importantly, if you want to score, you have to have the ball to score, right? So what's the point of giving away the ball if you have to just try and get it back to score a goal, right? That's essentially the main point that we'll be talking about here. And then, as well, you're probably wondering, well, what if I have 0 boost? You could still lose a 50 to maintain possession. What if your teammates have boost? Then they messed up their rotation. So that's going to be the one big part. And the second part, we're making sure that the 3 areas of the field are covered efficiently. And we're also going to be 3 necessary, I should say. 3 necessary areas of the field. We're going to make sure they are covered. Now, what are those areas of the field? One is the person on the ball. The second one is support. And the third one is off-ball pressure. Now, teams will accomplish these 3 goals in different ways, or some teams don't have one of these goals fully mastered. And that's what we're going to be looking at going into this game. We're going to be making sure that they also have someone on the ball, then someone supporting, then someone having off-ball pressure. But those are going to be the main things we're looking for here in the games today. But overall, it should be fun. Let's get into the replays. Here we go. Here's the replay files. So, first thing, let's see. What game do we want to look at from G2 first? So, G2, they ended up going 2-1. They beat Ghost. They swept Space Station. Luke, when we get a coaching session, do I still have that free session from when we played in Havoc League? Technically, that goes to Havoc teams. So technically, y'all stopped playing in the league, right? So technically, I would say that it doesn't go to that. Yep, it's $10 to $20, I believe, but since y'all are normally request most coaching sessions, then I do $10 for y'all since you do more than one. But here we go. So we're going to be going over G2 today. So probably the best game to look at is probably, honestly, a Furia game. So let's look at the 3-2 loss here. So game 3 versus Furia, round 2. Let's see how that goes. Are you making bank? Not enough to live on, but a decent amount. Here we go. Group C. Lights, you got to get Mar in here, bro. We're going over G2. Here we go. G2 versus Furia. We're going to look at game 3. And I always like looking at the stats. Let's look at the stats here for this game. Okay, so demos. Looking at the demos. Not a lot of demos compared to some other teams, but still, at least each player is getting a demo. So that's still good. Then, shooting-wise, G2, of course, tend to have a lot more shots than other teams. Furia as well, so that's also makes sense. What's up, Gran? Welcome to the stream, bro. How you doing? Alright, and then our average boost. G2 tend to be actually normally higher than other teams, but this seems relatively low. Looking at the big pad count. Oh my, look at all the big pads that these players are taking. There's no big pads on the field. So, Atomic and Chicago. Card actually having a lot of mini pads, so that of course makes sense. But looking at stolen big pads, yeah, Yan and Card, Yan and Atomic, that definitely makes sense. Speed of the game's relatively quick. Card is definitely filled in Kaio's role, I think, definitely, because Kaio, he's definitely seen as one of the best players in the game at being a pad player, and I think Card's trying to fill in that role. And all these players seem really experienced. Normally, the more percentage on the ground means the more experienced you are. You stay on the ground a lot longer. You pick when you should go, rather than jumping for every ball. But here we go. Let's look at game 3. Let's see. Like we said, we're going to be looking at... So, I can't wait for us to... Well, Furia didn't make the major, so... But Furia are a very interesting team because they're a solid team, but they've definitely fallen off on some of the main things that allowed them to win a world champion, to go far in majors. Okay, here we go. Right off the bat, we're gonna hopefully see a possession here from Atomic. So bad first touch from Atomic right off the bat. Alright, it's going to be interesting watching G2 play against Furia, because watching Liquid yesterday, like, it honestly didn't seem like the best gameplay when we were watching KC versus Liquid earlier. But they were still solid teams nevertheless. So here we go. Atomic in front of the ball here. Let's see what he does. He goes for the ball. I think it's a solid approach. Then I'm going to look at... So, JNAPS, I think, got demoed. So, here we go. Chicago supporting really well. Great possession from Chicago. Passing the ball mid. Ball up from JNAPS. Yeah, that definitely should be a goal here from G2. I mean, it's a brilliant pass. And then looking at it from Atomic's POV. Let's see. There we go. Because he fills in support here. And then he goes for the... and then he just kind of flies for it. It definitely... Maybe he just felt like he couldn't get a shot on it, so it goes out the backboard. JNAPS, though, I think this definitely should be a shot on target. Because that miss actually made it so Furia were able to counterattack. So, like, JNAPS, I think, even if he doesn't think he's going to score this, he wants to get it on the net here. Or at least high on the net. But a miss is a miss. G2 still looking okay. Continue to watch JNAPS here. Just for a boost, it's not there. It's not necessarily the end of the world. And there's one thing I want you guys to notice here about G2, and I want you to look at G2. So, normally when teams push up the field, whenever teams push up the field, they have someone on the ball, and the second man starts in behind, and the third man will eventually go behind them. But normally when teams push up the field like this, there's normally somebody watching mid on the other team, but G2 are really good at recognizing as this player when the midfield is open. And we'll actually see here, since Card is rushing back, Yan is going to probably grab this pad line or this pad line, staying further away from the play. G2 are a lot like European teams, where they like looking for this infield pass right here. Now, a team like Space Station, for example, they might see Card watching middle here or Lost right here, and they may say that a pass option is a bad idea here because it looks like it can be covered. But G2 are normally so good at passes that this is not so where these players have to watch mid perfectly if they want to try to stop them. And a lot of European teams are really good at this as well. That's why when we see Atomic taking possession here, he can most likely get a really good pass down to Chicago, and that could be a really good goal. Now, if Atomic does opt to go for a solo play, then Chicago can still fill in behind, cover the 50 option. But G2, I think, have really perfected this part of high-level rotation to where they know to initially support from behind, but if it's open, be there for a pass. Then normally they do make the pass, and it's a good shot. But if they don't go for the pass, they can still fill in behind their teammate, cover both options, which also allows their third man, if rotating back, to look for demos, and overall, a lot more time on the field. And if we actually watch this play run, you see Chicago, he does initially fill in behind, go in mid, and then JNaps ends up going behind him. So there we go. See a little bit of an adaptive rotation here from Chicago. Over here, Chicago, I don't really like what he's doing here, so I will say this is a mistake. So he does, because one, Atomic ends up giving away the ball, but two, Chicago's kind of just sitting here in the midfield, not really doing anything. We talked about how most of the time we see good teams, solid teams. If a pass isn't coming, they fill in right behind the teammate. Now, maybe JNaps said he was filling in behind here. At the end of the day, I don't know what their comms are like. But JNaps rushing into fill in behind Atomic ends up kind of limiting Chicago's options. He's only useful here if the ball pinches out mid, which essentially just forces him to rotate out behind JNaps anyway, which just still takes him a little bit to do. And now JNaps goes for a ball he's getting beat to. Chicago's last. Now he does get the beat. That's good, solid mechanics from Chicago. But I would say that's a little bit of a mistake on G2's part that you didn't really see in the spring split last season, because everyone's always talks about Rocket League players and teams constantly are improving. That's not completely true. I think most teams have gotten more consistent than anything, but sometimes teams do fall off on some of the team side of things. Now this is just one game. Of course, G2 are a very solid rotational team, in my opinion, probably one of the better rotating teams in the world. What normally holds them off is their individual skill, for the most part, their ability to challenge the ball, take possession, etc. Here we go. Let's see. I want to see Atomic take possession here, which he does. Gets it over one, trying to set up a pass. So look at this here from Chicago. So initially, Chicago, I think right here is, again, one of those individual things where he's not... But right here, he's trying to just cut in there at any moment to go for a shot. But in my opinion, with the information Chicago has here, I don't think this is a scoreable opportunity. He's overcommitting to this play. So looking at this, I would love to see Chicago, like right here, going for a mid pass because it's open is fine. But right here, probably the best thing for him to do would just be to demo card. Instead, he kind of just looks like he's going for the ball, and Lost gets a free 50 pass two of him. So that's what I'd say is bad, but right here, this is good. He recognizes that JNaps is going for the ball, right? So JNaps is ball guy. He recognizes Atomic can rotate further back, so Chicago's going to turn and fill in second behind his teammates here. And if we look at how this play goes, that's exactly what happens. Now, JNaps isn't able to follow it, but as you see, Chicago is ready to play support. And now, here we go. This is where we're seeing these three areas of the field being covered again. We have Atomic who's going to be on the ball. Chicago's going to play support for Atomic. And since they're both covering net here, that means JNaps is able to apply some off-ball pressure to the other team. So those are the three areas of the field being covered. And I think G2 are generally one of the cleaner teams at covering those options. As you see, Atomic, he takes the touch. And now Chicago takes the ball. Atomic fills in second. JNaps was looking for a bump. Now now Atomic's on the ball. JNaps has to watch him. And this is where it's actually, we go to JNaps' POV. We can actually see a lot more the thinking that G2 are going in here. He recognizes two teammates are back. He has 0 boost, so he feels like going for a boost steal here is not the end of the world. Now when he's rotating back, look, he's looking for Card here, but since Card jumps, he turns back. And now he's going to play, it's either he's going to go and Atomic fills in behind him, or Atomic's going to go and JNaps just stays here waiting for the force from Atomic. JNaps here, though, even though Atomic doesn't really do anything, JNaps reads the play perfectly here, and he would have actually had a free possession. Atomic stays under the ball here, which causes a double commit. And Atomic's touch, at the end of the day, isn't the best either. So this is what we're seeing here from Atomic. We've seen it a couple times already in game number 1, where he's given away the ball a couple of times, sure, but this is, of course, a more nervous game. But right here, he ends up... Oh, he messes up his recovery, which is fine. But then right here, he sees JNaps' back. He has to do two things. He has to either go for this ball, force right now, or he has to rotate behind JNaps, because JNaps is watching both of those options. Now, maybe there's a system G2 has in place, but there's not really a reason in this situation. It's not that threatening for G2 to go here. There's not really a reason for a double commit here. So looking at this play again, I'm trying to see it from both their point of views, because I can definitely see why Atomic went, but yeah, was it necessary for a double commit? We'll look at it one more time. Yeah, because I think it's a pretty clean read from JNAP, so JNAP should be saying, I got this all day. I think right here, because we can clearly tell where Card is hitting that ball. He's hitting that ball out mid. You can tell the entire time, even a couple seconds before he touches the ball. You still tell where that ball's going out. He can't really fake it in this situation. The ball's moving too slow, so I think it's pretty readable for JNAP. So maybe this is a comms issue. He should have definitely just said he's going. Looks like basic back post rotation. Well, back post rotation is a very old way of thinking about things. In Rocket League, there's not really... You do want to rotate back post because you want to avoid your teammate. But for example, we look at this from Atomic's POV. He's trying to take possession here. He's now going to fill in sec. He does mess up his recovery. Let's say Atomic doesn't mess up his recovery. Oh. Then he would be supporting Chicago probably right here. And at this point, he would just drive up the wall, and he'd just be a first man JNAPs to fill in behind. But since he messed up his recovery, he's in this kind of weird spot where he's under the ball. And right here, I don't mind him going if JNAPs isn't able to go, right? So in this situation, I think it is more on JNAPs to make sure Atomic knows, hey, I got this type of thing. But of course, maybe it's the nerves of playing in RLCS, but no real need to stay on that play a little longer. Now, the one thing that we are noticing about G2 compared to Liquid yesterday is Liquid, we noticed a lot of inconsistencies in their rotation, which is made up for by their individual smarts and mechanics. Whereas with G2, we're kind of seeing something a little different, where a lot of the rotations actually do seem pretty clean. They know where they need to go for the most part. And this is a brilliant goal here. So right here, because what I really want to do is look at this play from Chicago's point of view. So right here, he's trying to apply off-ball pressure. And then now what's going to happen here is, remember, we talked about the 3 areas of the field that need to be covered, right? We need someone on the ball, we need someone supporting, and we need someone applying off-ball pressure. Technically, technically Chicago's rotating out from applying off-ball pressure, but there's one last moment in your rotation as a third man, aka the guy applying off-ball pressure, that you can do, and that's watch for a blindside pass. And right here, JNAPS flies up for this ball. Chicago notices that he can be a passing option here, so he asks for the pass right. JNAPS passes it right. Chicago turns, and he's able to get a good shot on target here. And if you notice, that's exactly what happens. He asks for a pass from JNAPS. Chicago turns and puts it in an empty net. But how this play start? It all started from a basic rotation. It all starts from making sure that we have one guy on the ball, one guy supporting, and one guy applying off-ball pressure. Because we notice right here, Chicago goes. He ends up missing, but that's fine. Now, there is a little bit of a misrotation here from JNAPS and Atomic. Let's see why that happens here. So it looks like both players want to turn to fill in this ball. So in my opinion, I think this is JNAP's mistake here. Because one thing we have to realize is that Atomic isn't like he's fully rotating out of the play. And he's also more behind Chicago. So if we look at this play from behind the players, it might be a little bit easier to visualize. Yeah, JNAP should go behind Atomic here. Oh. There we go. So right here, what should happen is we, of course, have Chicago on the ball. And right now, Atomic's playing support for Chicago. So JNAP should fill in. So if since JNAP's is rotating back, he should fill in behind Atomic. This is how Rocket League rotation works. Doesn't matter what region you're in. It's pretty basic stuff. You have someone on the ball, someone supporting, and the third man applies off-ball pressure, but eventually he rotates behind his 2 teammates. And right here, Atomic is just trying to get himself in a better angle of approach. But JNAPS just sees that Chicago needs support, so instead of just letting Atomic do it, he kind of cuts in at the same time. That's what causes their double commit. So that's one mistake in JNAPS' rotation we've seen a couple times here, where he tries to fill into a rotation a little bit too quickly. And if we let this run out, that's what causes the double commit. Now, luckily, what we notice here is that even though Atomic and JNAPS are still in a spot to play the ball. So Chicago, he's doing his job. Right now, so far, Chicago's doing his job really well. He's applying off-ball pressure. And now we just need somebody to turn to fill in going for the ball, and then we need whoever else to fill in support. And if we notice, that's what ends up happening. JNaps ends up turning to be the ball guy here. Atomic recognizes Chicago's upfield, so he goes to fill in support behind JNaps, and Chicago just continues his rotation out, applying off-ball pressure. And that's what ends up happening here. Exactly, there we go. JNaps now goes, Atomic's filling in support behind him, and then it ends up working out really well for G2. So there was an individual mistake from JNaps there, but the rotation itself was done really well. And that's why G2 are so good, because rotationally they just have that system. Even though JNaps messed up in going for that ball, he quickly recovers, he reads that ball's coming to him, he passes it to the open player in Chicago, and then Atomic this entire time as well, even after the double commit, he still does his job. Because right here, he's going to fill in Chicago. As you can see, from Atomic's POV, he has no idea why JNaps should have gone there. But here we go. He just goes to fill in. Once he sees the balls hitting over him, he fills in behind JNaps. And then, here we go. Then he's going to fill in behind Chicago as well. Really good rotations from G2. So I think that's something that we could put down for G2. And at least in regards to their strengths. When it comes to G2's strengths, they have the base structure / idea / concept of rotations down really well. But the one thing that we're noticing in terms of weaknesses is individually the players seem to not be aware of teammates at times. AKA they fill in rotation too early. Too early. So that's something that we're noticing. The strength, the rotations are really good, which honestly I expected going into this replay review. But individually, the players seem to not be aware of their teammates at times, which is a very big issue. So let's see if that idea continues to happen. Because what it could be, because that's something we noticed with JNaps. So I want to see, and we noticed it with a little bit with Chicago as well, but it could have been caused by JNaps. So what I want to do is I'm going to watch the rest of this game from Chicago's point of view and see if it shows up in Chicago and Atomic's gameplay as well. So here we go. So he's going to fill in behind JNaps here. So this is really good right off the bat. He's reading the play well. He's going to fill in second behind Atomic. Atomic flicks it up. And this is what we're noticing. So this is what we're noticing in G2. They're taking possession really well. I like the idea on the pass here from Chicago, but technically this is still a misread on the play, which I would put down to mechanics or individual smarts. We can see where Atomic's hitting this ball, and then he ends up misreading it, which is something that I don't honestly see a lot of other players making that same mistake. There we go. He fills in first though. Alright, so this is a big misplay from Chicago. Alright, so it's not just JNaps that's individually messing up rotation sometimes. And so that's at least good for G2. The individual stuff doesn't come just from JNaps. But when we look at this play from above, what we can see here is, well, the ball's going to be a little bit off screen here, but I'm sure you guys can visualize. The ball's right here. We can see the circle on the ground. But here we go. What we're noticing here is we have Atomic going for the ball, so he's going to be the ball guy. We're going to have JNaps fill in support. And then Chicago, he can't really go upfield to go for a demo here, because I'm going to illustrate it this way. If you are if you're the third man in the rotation, if you're in front of the ball and you're the third man, you're just applying alpha pressure, you're eventually rotating out, the end goal being behind your teammates. But you're probably wondering, well, if the third man's job is to apply alpha pressure, why can't he go upfield to go for a demo like this while his two teammates push up the field? Well, there's two ideas to keep in mind, but it's under the same basic principle of a flow of a rotation, the momentum of a rotation. Looking at the other team's momentum, they're of course going this way. They're going to try and meet us at the ball, right? So if Chicago's going for demos or applying off-ball pressures in this direction, he's moving with the flow of the other team, which by nature is really easy for the opponents to avoid. Now, that on its own isn't necessarily the biggest idea to make it so we don't want to go for off-ball pressure in this situation. The other idea is the flow of our own team. If we're going for demos like this, we are inadvertently going into the flow of the other team, And if we give it a numbers advantage, let's say all of Furia are behind the ball. This would essentially mean it's a 4-on-2 in terms of people going in a direction. And just by nature, like we can tell that the ball is most likely going to end up going towards our side of the field. But also think about a different way. We're just getting in the way of our teammates. And you're probably wondering, okay, so how do we get off ball pressure? Well, most likely, whoever's ball guy right now, Atomic, he's not going to be ball guy going up the entire field. He might take the ball some distance, but eventually he's going to end up in front of the ball, and the ball will find itself in the hands of JNAPs, right? So if Atomic's about to be the third man in any short time frame, you might as well not have Chicago push up field because I mean, Atomic's about to become that man. Then JNAPs, of course, will have the ball, and then if Chicago had pushed up field initially, once Atomic loses that 50-50, what's happening? We have a ball guy without support. So Chicago would have to come back anyway, or it'd force Atomic to come back anyway. So with all these ideas in mind, it just makes more sense for Atomic to go, then JNAPs, and then Chicago to fill in behind here. And we'll actually notice that in this play, when we let it play, Chicago starts pushing up the midfield. And actually, look, Atomic's already in front of the ball. But here we go. Look at what ends up happening here. We have Atomic and JNAPs, which are... They messed up their possession a little bit, sure. Like, we could put that down to individual skill. They messed up their possession a little bit. But since since Chicago's pushing up the field, what ends up happening is Atomic gets beat. And then, let's say JNAPs read the play a little bit better here, and he was like, maybe he was right here. Then he would be taking this ball, but he wouldn't have a support player since where's Chicago? He's doing nothing. This is the second time we've noticed Chicago push up the field here for no reason, and he's been useless both times. So I think we can kind of illustrate something for Chicago here. So for Chicago, one thing we're noticing is he tends to go middle when it is not his time, which ends up making him useless to the play for some amount of time. That's one big thing for Chicago, is when he tends to go middle when it is not his time/turn, which ends up making him useless to the play for some time. So that's the one big thing we're noticing about Chicago, as a matter of fact. So you're going back to this play, like right here, he should not be thinking go middle for a pass. You're late. All good, Matthias, but welcome to the stream, homie. Hope you're doing well. Don't worry, this is only the first replay of the deep dive analysis. But here we go. But in terms of strengths, whenever any of the G2 players are on the ball, they at least understand the idea of possession. So that's one big strength that I do want to give to G2. They understand the importance of keeping the ball close, not banging the ball. There we go. That's good for G2. So that's another strength we can give G2. As you notice, most of the mistakes that we have really found so far for G2 have been little individual things. Now, when we looked at Team Liquid earlier, or yesterday, excuse me, we had a lot of supporting. We had a support issue with the Chronic, but in terms of a team, whenever something abnormal happened, they didn't really have a good way of fixing the abnormalities in the rotation. They just have great individual recoveries for the most part. But when we're looking at G2, most of their mistakes come from the individual skill side of things, but their rotation is solid enough where even if there's an individual mistake, they're able to fill in the abnormalities pretty clean. This is what should make G2 a really good team on LAN. But sometimes when you're on LAN, the individual side of your mechanics tends to get even worse, which could also explain why G2 are inconsistent on LAN. They have LANs where individually, if they're feeling great, their rotations will fill in for themselves, and they will beat any team. But if they're having a LAN where individually they're not feeling that great, then their rotations aren't able to make up for that big drop in mechanics for the most part. There we go. So that's a little bit of a misread from Chicago. That's what ends up creating this goal. Because we can see Atomic gets the bump. I guess it is a harder read. JNAPs did get a touch on it. Either way, though, looking at Chicago, he is jumping a little early here. There's not really a reason why he should jump this early. I know Lost is right there, but it's not a... I know it might sound weird, but it's not really a threatening play right now. Actually, looking at where Lost is, so that's a little bit of a misread on my part. That's why we look at the play multiple times. So looking at this, Lost is there. He's going for more of a pre-jump, so I guess that's understandable. Actually, never mind. So Chicago, I'm gonna say Chicago's fine. Let's look at this from JNapps' POV. So JNapps, he's trying to fill in support behind Chicago here. Now he's gonna go for this ball. So if we notice, what happens here with JNapps is he's forcing this ball low. And there's a big issue with forcing the ball low. Of course, I know he wants to avoid the demo here, but if JNapps even gets the touch he wants, where's that ball going to go anyway? Just going to go straight to Yan, right? So with this issue, since he forces the ball low, it makes it really difficult for his two teammates to read. I mean, look at this from Atomic's POV. We saw it from Chicago's POV, and we saw how hard it was to read. And then we look at it from Atomic's POV. We see just how much variables that Atomic has to worry about. And to be honest, he almost got up to that save. But this whole situation starts with JNapps forcing low instead of forcing high. Now, I'm sure you guys are wondering, why do you force high in Rocket League? Some people may already know, in which case, feel free to say why in chat, why you force high. But look, we're going to look at it from Atomic's POV here, right? Now, if JNapps is forcing high, he's aiming probably below the ball, in between the ball and the car the opponent air dribbling, right? So if he's aiming right there, then, as Atomic's rotating back, we can see that if he's forcing high, what's the trajectory of the other team this entire aerial? Well, either way, you can forcing low or forcing high does force them to lose possession, but one's better than the other. And the reason why forcing high is better is when you force high, look at they're only going in one direction the entire time, right? They're going in one direction the entire time, and this makes it for the defenders, whether it be Chicago or Atomic, it makes it really easy to read and get possession. If you force high, you can't get faked. Exactly. That's also a really good point. If you force high, you're playing ball the entire time, right? So you can't get faked. So that's one smaller good thing. But the most important thing is when you're forcing high, it's super readable for your teammates, which means that if you force high to the backboard, Atomic can just drive at the backboard, take the free possession, right? So that's the main reason why. Whereas if you're forcing low, right here, Card got the bump. It makes it really awkward, and then the ball's in a really good spot for Lost or Yan to follow. If it bounces low to the ground, here comes a support, right? But if you force high, it's a lot harder for the support player to get up to that in a meaningful way as well, right? But also, when you force low, let's say they're air dribbling high into the air here, and you force low, you're above the ball, they can just get a reset, or they can start an air dribble going lower, and then, so that's one trajectory change, they're going up, they're going down, and then they can use that reset to go up again at the Pop-Tart of the net, they can fake it and go low. That's so many different things for a player on defense to be able to read. So, when we're looking at this play here, we see JNapps ends up forcing low, and that's what creates the really difficult read for Chicago and Atomic. And then Yan just comes in after the ball bounces up and just slots it into the top shelf. And then we're going to look at this again at full speed here. We're going to take a couple seconds back. Just look at this from Atomic's POV. He's rotating out. He's just grabbing boots. Like right here, it's nothing threatening. But then since JNapps forces low, Chicago ends up misreading it because he has to be wary of the lost shot. Then once he gets faked out by the last shot, Atomic's just sitting in net. Right, and looking at it from Chicago's POV as well. Look at this from Chicago's POV. Right here, JNapps, he sees JNapps is forcing low, but look, Lost is pre-jumping. Like, Card probably, like, thinking about it from Furio's POV, Card probably called the bump, so that's why Lost is already pre-jumping. So Chicago watching the pre-jump from Lost probably thinks, oh, I have to go here. Whereas, imagine what would happen if JNapps forced high here. If he forced high, then Chicago would never have had to pre-jump, and then Atomic would have had a free ball. Again, it makes it so hard for your teammates to read if you force low. That's why whenever you're forcing, you want to make sure you do end up forcing high. So, at the end of the day, like, and also look at, even if JNapps got the touch he wanted, let's say he completely avoided the bump, he's still hitting it right to Yan, right? So it's still a giveaway of possession. So JNapps individually did not make the best choice in that situation. Hey, Kilo, thank you so much for the sub, homie. Thank you so much, bro. It is very, very much appreciated. Thank you so much. And now you get the Luke Sweaty emoji, too. So that's also peak. There we go. Let's see how G2 continue to go. It's such a small mistake, but that's what it's such a small mistake, yeah. But even though it's a small mistake, those things compound at the highest level. For example, if you're in a rank B 6-man's lobby and you end up forcing low, it might not be the end of the world, because individually the other team might not be good enough to capitalize on that mistake. But when you're playing against the best teams in the world, if you aren't subconsciously forcing high, that's a big issue. Because if you aren't subconsciously forcing high every time you go, that is something that other teams will subconsciously exploit. So that's something you have to keep in mind, is that, like, at the highest level, like, for example, I did Team Liquid yesterday. I wrote down a Chronic is second man needs to find a way to be more confident when supporting his teammates. He was way too far away from the play, which made him get beat a lot of the time. A Tao, he tends to react to the play rather than reading it. Oski sometimes goes for balls he's completely getting beat to. This is not a lot of mistakes, right? These are very, like, it's one rotation, one supporting mistake from a Chronic, one reading mistake from a Tao, and also a little bit of a reading mistake from Team Liquid. That's all just one mistake. But as we watched all those replays, we saw that those mistakes were prevalent in every single replay. And it was the main reason why Liquid are losing games or getting scored on. So when you're at the highest level, it's more of a which team has the least amount of mistakes. I did a test stream a long time ago. Gen G seemed like the team with the least amount of mistakes, and that's why they're so good. But individually, they're not as good as a team like FaZe, and recently, FaZe have fixed a lot of their mistakes. They have less mistakes than most other teams right now, and that's why they're looking so good. And I can't wait for when I get to look at Carmine Core. That'll definitely be fun. So here's another goal on the board here. Let's see what ends up happening here. Where did this play start out? So this is technically a giveaway of possession from Chicago, but we'll look at his boost count. Maybe he had low boost. So one, his padding is bad here. Yeah, so he's going for the instant counterattack play, but he's passing it to the other team. I mean, for the most part. And the weird part about him going for this is he sees both his teammates on his screen, but then he instantly goes for the pass off the backboard, which is just to the other team. Like, this is what I would say is another individual mistake from G2. I mean, like, as you can see, his teammates were trying to fill in each position. Like right here, JNAPS, he's trying to grab boost. He goes back here for boost. He turns immediately for this ball. He read where that ball is going. He's instantly up, but then he ends up getting beat. So he shot that ball into the corner. Honestly, he doesn't need to hit the ball hard anywhere. Because he, in my personal opinion, one, he should have been grabbing a little bit more pads here. So as he's rotating back, he should be grabbing, probably take this pad line. He would have probably had 70 boost, and in my opinion, he can just take possession on the backboard here. So, of course, he would be taking it into the corner, but it's more the idea of there's no reason why he should hit this ball hard. This should have been a free possession for someone of his caliber. Yeah, we keep it close. Okay, yeah. And that's what ends up leading to this play, where it's a free ball, so Card leaves it for Yan. Like, it turns into a situation where we gave the other team free possession on our side of the field. Now, JNAPS does force high, but technically he's not trying to force high here. He just ends up doing it, because he's just trying to go for the ball here. But something we didn't talk about with forcing high earlier is you only want to force high if it's threatening. Now, of course, JNAPS is just trying to play the ball here, but let's say JNAPS was trying to force high here. Since he jumped so early here, this forcing high ends up making so even though he did force it high, Card's able to regain the possession, and then of course he ends up faking it for Yan too, which makes it even more difficult to read. But another thing about forcing high is you want it to become threatening, and it doesn't matter if you're playing against First Killer, Zen, doesn't matter who you're playing against. You only want to force high when it becomes threatening. If the other team is air dribbling off their backboard, it doesn't matter if it's a bronze or if it's a pro, it's still not threatening, right? It only becomes threatening when they're actually able to put a good shot on target. And in this situation, if JNAPS was trying to force high, of course, he doesn't need to worry about the shot. He can't save a shot, so the only thing he's worrying about is if it's a slow play, so that's why he would jump. But he still wants to wait for it to actually become threatening, which now, when they're actually able to get a shot, this is when he should have forced high. And then Atomic on the backboard have gotten a free ball. But of course, I do understand that JNAPS is just playing to get the ball here. But either way, this goal was caused initially by this giveaway possession by Chicago. So I think that's something that we can put as a weakness for G2 overall. So overall, individually seems to not be aware of their teammates at times, which is a big thing. But also individually they make touches that make the game harder on themselves. Small giveaways of possession, double committing when it's clearly a teammate's ball, etc. It's something that all the G2 players have. Oh, for sure. If G2 had the individual skill of a FaZe or a Liquid, they would be the best team in the world right now. I definitely agree with that. I mean, I definitely would say that. Which is why I'm really happy that FaZe are actually starting to fix their rotation. Now, when I did the test stream earlier, it did definitely look like FaZe were a lot cleaner in rotation, but First Killer still caused a majority of the mistakes, and a majority of the goals as well, the last time we looked at them on stream. But they definitely look a lot cleaner. If FaZe continue this trend of improving their rotations, I can definitely see them consistently being at the top of North America and the world here for a good bit. But, of course, first, we haven't seen them on LAN yet with them fixing their playstyle, so who knows how it's going to go. Here we go. So here we go. So this is what I was talking about a little bit. So Chicago's going for this ball, but it's not threatening yet, right? But even though it's not threatening, he still forces high. But as you see, this is the problem. So you do want to force high, but since he forced high so early, Card's able to stick on this ball, and honestly, that should have probably been a goal. Now, eventually, I think Atomic starts a very quick counterattack. Gets a pass mid to JNaps. Like, that's just a really good play. G2 on offense, of course, have always been really solid. But this, honestly, like, it turned from what should have been a goal for Card into a counterattack. Now, does that mean this is groups? Yeah, this is groups. We're gonna look at the quarterfinals after this. We're just taking one game from the groups so we can kind of get a judgment on how to see what to look out for in the playoffs. But overall, looking at this from Atomic's POV. So this is, of course, after Chicago made the mistake. Luckily, he got a free ball. He got the beat over one. He kept possession. He passed it mid the JNaps. And look, this is what I was talking about. A strength for G2 that we can really put down well is all of them of the players are great at recognizing when the midfield is open for passes. And this is something that a lot of EU teams are really good at recognizing as well. Because there we go. And that, right after he passes it mid, he goes for the demo on Yan. JNaps just takes possession the whole time. Like, that was brilliant. Like, that was amazing from G2. But as we can probably see, against Furia, who rotationally have been not looking the best, and even individually have not been looking the best in recent times, they're still struggling. And they do eventually lose the series to Furia as well. Still, I do like what I'm seeing from G2. I do like what I'm seeing in terms of the rotations. They do understand that when it comes to Rocket League, there's 3 areas of the field that need to be covered. We need someone on the ball, someone supporting, and someone applying off-ball pressure. And all 3 of those, and I think all 3 of those areas, for the most part, are prioritized and covered. But the main issue normally comes from G2's actual individual idea, and honestly, individually, they're still better than most players in the world. But if we compare G2 to a Gen G, a FaZe, even a Furia, who rotationally haven't been looking good, G2 just aren't at that level at the moment. And now some people might say Atomic is at that level, which, to be honest, mechanically, possession-wise, Atomic is really good. But when it comes to actually, and honestly, goaltending-wise, he's really good as well. But we've seen some issues of inconsistency when we've still seen some issues of maybe he forces high a little bit too early. Sometimes we see him go for a pass that's maybe a little bit too difficult to execute. But honestly, Atomic is looking like the best player on G2, at least from this game alone. Atomic doesn't seem to have the same individual issues that JNaps and Chicago have. Here we go. Now, it looks like Furia are going to counterattack goal here. Oh my goodness, what happened here? Ooh. Atomic has been kind of inconsistent this season, and I feel like last season it wasn't as bad. Actually, Atomic actually was very consistent last season as well. I can actually just show you one replay, and at the very, and like the first two goals, G2 scored the first 2 goals of the game, but Atomic was getting bumped out of position. He wasn't going into the right position. It just G2 were individually were better than everyone else, at least online. But what happened here? That's the big question. Actually, so it's not just Chicago. JNaps is rushing upfield into the middle as well, which caused him to get completely beat, and he ends up that's just a mechanical miss. Like, if at the pro level, JNaps should be getting this ball every day of the week. This should never be a miss. Now, and that's me talking at the pro level, of course. And looking at Atomic, I think Atomic was fine here for the most part. He's of course pushing at the field. He forces. He goes for a boost steal. He's applying some off-ball pressure. But then, what happened with Chicago? Chicago, he's getting bumped. He's supporting Atomic. He gets beat, but then he also goes up pitch. So this is actually the first time we've seen a rotational mistake from G2. So like we talked about, we always want someone on the ball. We want someone supporting, and we want someone applying off-ball pressure. But the main idea we want to make sure is that there is a priority to high-level rotations. Of course, someone on the ball is the most important. Someone supporting is the next most important. And then off-ball pressure is the third most important. They're all necessary parts of the game, but there's still a priority to them, if that all makes sense. And right here, Chicago was supporting Atomic initially. Atomic was going for the ball. Chicago supporting. JNaps was behind them. That's something that we did notice. But then right here, Atomic is applying off-ball pressure, and Chicago still opts to go upfield instead of to fill in support behind JNaps here. And Chicago, he should have recognized that Atomic's applying off-ball pressure and filled in here, but that was a big mistake. Now, imagine if Chicago rotated back. Let's actually look at it from where Chicago was. So where's Chicago? He ends up landing here. So yeah, so he should end up seeing that he's getting beat. He turned back down the pad line. And then JNaps would probably not have panicked. He'd probably continue to force. Oh my, yeah. This is never going in if Chicago does that rotation. But as you see, since Chicago doesn't rotate back, that forces Atomic to leave off-ball pressure early, and he still couldn't get back in time. Some people may have said that this was Atomic's mistake, but if you fully look at it, Chicago should have recognized Atomic's applying off-ball pressure. You need to be rotating back. But instead, we have 2 players applying off-ball pressure, and then JNaps ends up missing an individual mistake right there. That's ended up just being a misread from them. So let's see. So right here, after the first replay, we have a couple basic ideas. Chicago, he tends to go mid when it's not his time. And we only saw JNaps do this once, so I'm not going to put that down as a JNaps mistake right now. But I will say for JNaps, we will look out for individual smarts in regards to forcing high, and then basic mechanical touches when under pressure. And then so far for Atomic, I honestly haven't seen any big mistakes from Atomic, so I'll still put his name down. But for right now, haven't really seen any big issues. So here we go, and everybody in chat, you guys can make a choice. So we're going to be looking at the quarterfinal here. What game do we want to see from this quarterfinal? I'll let anybody in chat, if you have a specific game you want us to watch between G2 and V1, say it now. But overall, it's... But of course, I'm writing down all these things that are good about G2, bad about... Yeah, we're looking at V1, but what game against V1 do we want to look at? We want to look at Game 7. I mean, it is a 3-2, so that is definitely a good game to look at. Reedy wants to look at Game 1. Okay. Looks like we do got we got a Game 7, Game 5 or 7. All right, so I think yeah, let's look at Game 7. We got a lot of requests for 7, but yeah. So one thing we do want to keep in mind when we're looking at G2 here is, of course, I've written down all these mistakes and everything that we're gonna be looking at for G2. So now we're gonna look at more replays from G2 in different series to see if they are still prevalent, or to see if they're a one-time mistake. Because maybe JNaps' individual smarts like forcing high, maybe that was just a one-game thing, right? So, and then, for example, their strengths are really good. They're recognizing when the midfield's open. They know to not bang the ball. They know to try and... They have the basic concepts of rotations down. Because we only saw one rotational mistake from G2, and that was Chicago at the very end. So maybe that's a Chicago rotation thing where we can add on. Because we already see one individual rotation thing from Chicago. There might be another one. But here we go. Let's look at Furia versus... Let's look at, V1 versus G2. Playoffs, quarterfinals. G2 versus V1. We'll look at Game 7. Of course, we'll look at the stats here momentarily. We did see some boost things that were different. So overall, G2... Okay, this definitely makes sense. G2 definitely have a lot more shots than V1. That makes sense. Assists, G2 tend to be at least relatively equal with V1, but Atomic getting a lot more assists. V1 definitely have more save. Demos, that's going to be the big thing. G2 at least have... Okay, G2 have a really good amount of demos per game. So does Com, of course. And then G2 actually are really good at avoiding demos as well, by the what it looks like as well. So that's also really solid. But of course, they weren't able to demo Torment that much. Okay. Positioning-wise... movement-wise. A lot of these players tend to be a lot more grounded, which is very good. It means that they're not hesitating, but at the same time, they're not jumping for every ball. And it seems to be a relatively fast game as well. All right. Stats at the end of the day don't mean everything, but you can still notice some maybe key things, like G2 weren't getting as many demos in a series, or maybe they're not able to avoid demos in a series. But here we go. So one player I really want to look at, because this is definitely he was definitely the worst player in the game we looked at before, where he tends to go middle when it's not his turn. And then something we also saw from him was a giveaway possession that looked like just a one-time thing. But overall, we're going to look at the rotations individually from Chicago here in this game. Of course, we do have to understand there is a bit more pressure. This is Game 7 of a quarterfinal. G2 trying to play for that second seed to lock in the major. Here we go. He's first man here. He doesn't throw himself out of the play, so he's already doing a little bit better individually than he did in the group final match. He fills in first here. Yeah, that's all fine. One thing to keep in mind about G2 is they love using their third man as an outlet pass. So when Chicago goes upfield, we're probably going to see that a lot. What happened here? So I would say that's a mechanical mistake from Chicago. Like, that's what you see. When we look at G2, we notice just weird whiffs, weird mistouches. That's what I mean by the mechanics of G2 honestly aren't as good as say a lot of these other teams that are at the top of North America right now. But here we go. This is good possession, really good shot, forces V1 to make a save. And here we go as well. So G2 don't end up getting a goal here, but this is the base rotation that I want to see, right? Whoops, there we go. This is the base rotation that I want to see. Honestly, it comes down to they have to put in the time. Like, when we're looking at the best players in the world right now, we look at players like First Killer, we look at players like Zen, all these different players, Monkey Moon, all these different individual players that are super, super good. What are they grinding? They're solo queuing twos, they're staying at the top of the leaderboards. People ask me, why did NRG fall off? Well, one, their rotations were horrible. That's one big thing. But two of the players don't really grind the game. Squishy and Justin, I see them play casual 90% more than ranked. And even then, it still doesn't compare to like they put most of their time in scrims for the most part. The individual side of Rocket League is big. Some people say it's a 60-40 split, but in my personal opinion, if you want to be winning majors, you have to have a baseline of mechanics. And that baseline of mechanics, like, you can't be whiffing. Like, you have to expect mechanical perfection from yourself. And I think having that mindset, if you have that mindset, you're able to continue to improve those mechanics. But like I said about here, we have Chicago, who's going to fill in first here. And we got JNaps filling in second. Atomic filling in third behind them. And eventually, Chicago's going to go for the shot. It will get saved by Torment off the wall. But then we have Chicago applying off-ball pressure. JNaps comes in with the follow-up to be on the ball. And Atomic's going to fill in with support behind him. So that's the three areas of the field going to be covered. Off-ball pressure, ball, and support. So here we go. Right off the bat, G2's rotations in Game 7 looking fantastic. Let's see. There we go, and we see that exactly how it is. Now, JNaps ends up misreading a little bit where that ball's going to go, but their base rotation is still solid. Because right here we have Chicago applying off-ball pressure, and we have JNaps filling in support for Atomic, and Atomic going for the ball, right? So right off the bat, so we have the base structure rotation looking perfect, right? We have off-ball pressure, ball guy, and support guy. The base structure of the G2's rotation looking really solid. Hey, Blukey, thanks for the follow, homie. Welcome to the stream. But here we go. We got Chicago rotating out as off-ball pressure. JNaps was ball guy. Atomic was support guy. And then, in order to make sure Chicago can continue to apply off-ball pressure, and now Atomic's going for the ball, JNaps is going to fill in support, right? Because like we talked about, person on the ball is highest priority, support's the next priority, and then off-ball pressure is the third priority, right? And with that in mind, Atomic's now going to fill in ball guy. Chicago's already applying off-ball pressure, and JNaps currently doesn't have a job, so he fills in the one job that needs to be filled in, support. So this is already G2's rotations, again, showing why they're some of the best rotations in the world. And then here we go. So I don't like this rotation from Chicago, but from Atomic, but it actually does force out the ball. It's something that BDS liked to do last season. They like using their third man when they rotate it out, kind of like a force, like a blindside force. And it gives the person behind him a free ball, because technically it's not the worst play in the world. Because remember, keeping in mind, ball guy, support guy, off ball pressure. Because technically, Atomic, he's applying off ball pressure. He's just filling in ball guy, right? And even though JNaps was the ball guy, he'll just fill in support behind Atomic. And Chicago, he's already rotated out, but he would fill in behind them as well. So then once Atomic gets beat, he's able to turn up the field and continue to apply off ball pressure. JNaps will continue to be ball guy, and Chicago will continue to be support, right? So it was honestly a decent idea from Atomic. I just don't like it because, honestly, I think JNaps would have gotten the same challenge anyway. But here we go. Look at this. G2 once again. Off-ball pressure, ball guy, support guy. This is what we're seeing from G2 every time. This is why they're such a good rotational team. And look, that's a free ball for Atomic. Now, again, see, that's why G2's rotations are so clean. They understand the base They understand the base idea of how to play the game really, really well. We need someone on the ball. We need someone applying off-ball pressure. We need someone supporting. And they try to do that as quickly as possible. So why aren't G2 the best team in the world? It goes down to the individual side of things again, right? Or mechanically, they're not as good as other teams. So if G2 aren't on their game mechanically, like they're not playing at least at their average mechanics, then they will fall off. I mean, people ask me, why G2 lose the World Championship? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, the G2 at the World Championship, they were rotating properly. They were doing all the same passes they normally do. And even their defense still looked okay. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't perfect, but it looked okay. So why they end up losing? I mean, G2, every single time they got a pass, they shot it, they hit it off the crossbar, they hit it off the post. Again, it's that individual side of things for G2. And of course, and I feel bad for Sathu in that aspect, because G2, their rotating's perfectly, so you don't want to like change their rotation to make up for their mechanics. But at the same time, like, mechanics are probably the thing that takes the longest for a pro to work on compared to anything else, right? Like with a rotation, you could probably tell a pro a rotational concept, they'll master it within a week or two. But if you tell them something mechanically, like just in general, they need to improve their speed and consistency of mechanics, it's really hard for a coach to be able to do. And Sathu, he wasn't the most mechanical pro himself, so it's definitely something that G2 are just gonna continue to improve their rotational consistency, grind their mechanics, and maybe by the World Championship they'll be in a spot where they can actually win the World Championship again. Because just the individual skill of teams are so insane. People always ask me, why is First Killer at the top of the game for so long if smart-wise he's always been really, really bad? Well, First Killer is so good mechanically that his mechanics make up for a lot of the mistakes that he has. But here we go. I like this here from G2. We see, again, we recognize G2. They're really good at recognizing when the midfield's open here. But look at this here from JNaps. He's taking possession. He takes his time. He 50s it under. Really good stuff from G2. So right off the bat, we're not noticing as many of the same individual mistakes that we noticed from the last game. Now, we haven't seen JNaps in a defensive situation yet, so that's something we're going to look out for. We're about to see 2 goals. Atomic's honestly still continue to look good. In Chicago, he's also fixed a little bit of his mistakes. We're going to continue to watch Chicago here for a bit, and then we'll look more at the goals more in depth. Here we go. So Chicago, rotate behind your teammate. That's really solid. Now he's going to read the play here. Okay, that's a good read from Chicago. Now fill in support behind Atomic. Although I think I'm noticing a pattern for Atomic that we'll look out for. So we finally found something for Atomic. Tends to want to cut into the play too early on occasion. Too early. Too early. Slowing down his teammates. His teammates' rotations. So we'll keep that in mind whenever we look at Atomic here for a bit. Because cuts are normally there to speed up the rotation, but if you do it when a teammate's already in position, it'll actually slow down your team's rotation. It'll slow down the flow. All right, here we go. So Chicago's gonna fill in support. You can fill in ball guy now. He goes for the 50. Atomic with a really good read. He actually managed to pass it up the field as well. Ends up putting it off the backboard. It's not the best play, but I mean it works out. There we go. So here we go. So this is actually really good. So here, so Atomic is doing here what JNAPS is failing to do in the previous game. If we look at Atomic, when he's forcing high, he's waiting for it to become threatening. Right? He has 70 boost. It's not threatening. It's not threatening. It's only when beast mode is actually at the top of the goal box where he forces high. It allows Chicago to get the save as well. So this is a really good force high for here, but when we look at JNAPS, I think we're starting to see another, like, this is not, like, I know it's beast mode in the air, but, and this is something that a lot of pros actually have a mistake with. Just because it's beast mode, just because it's first killer, just because it's Zen, this is still not a threatening aerial from version 1. It only becomes threatening when beast mode's actually able to score. Right, which right here he's not able to score, but JNAPS is still forcing high. So I think we can pretty much solidify for JNAPS forcing high too early. Forcing high in general is a mistake. Too early, and sometimes forces low. So that's one big mistake we've now solidified as an individual mistake for JNAPS. He doesn't know how to force properly sometimes. And then let's see if his basic mechanical touches is a big mistake still. As we can see, that's what... So, like, this honestly shouldn't have been that scary of a play. It should have been... JNAP should have waited to force here. Like, I would have loved to see JNAP. So let's actually play the way JNAP should have rotated here. He waits, he waits, he waits, he waits. Now it becomes threatening. And then JNAP would force. And Atomic, who had been in a really good position, has a way easier save than Atomic forcing for Chicago in this instance, right? Now, Atomic and Chicago, they were still able to execute the force and the support well, but as you could probably tell, if JNAPS had forced at the proper time, that would not have been as scary. And it's little things like that that make G2 just slightly less individually consistent than other teams. But here we go. Beast mode. Pops the ball up high. Ooh. So this would be what I would say is a misread from JNAPS, which, again, it adds to when JNAPS is under pressure. He misses basic mechanical touches. And when I say basic mechanical touches, I mean for a pro. So, I mean like basic mechanical touches for a pro when under pressure. And this is another one of those situations. Don't get me wrong. I know it's a difficult read, but when you're at the professional level, you have to expect players to get reads like this. Now, I see it is a difficult read, don't get me wrong, but it's still possible to read. And actually, I don't watch a lot of his videos, but I believe Waitin Pilkin made a video that mechanics that pros are still not good at being the corner reads, and that's definitely one of those hard corner reads, but at the same time, it's definitely possible for him to still make the save here. I mean, right here we see it's bouncing up high, and honestly it's not even threatening yet, so he's also jumping really early, but then he also ends up not being able to get the read as well. So that is, he is under pressure. It is a hard read, but at the end of the day, pros are able to make those saves, or are able to make those touches. And off the kickoff, I mean, it's just a kickoff goal. Let's see, does something happen? Atomic ends up trying to win the kickoff. And then it looks like Torment completely loses it right to Beast Mode. So overall, Beast Mode had a really good read on that, and it ends up being a goal. So honestly, right now it's looking like V1 should win this game. If I'm being honest, like that's what it's looking like at this moment in time. Let's see if G2's other mistakes that we saw last series come back. There we go. So this is really solid. As you see, possession from JNaps, support from Atomic. G2, they're clean. They're good enough with their rotations to where their offense is normally really solid. They're able to get good shots on target sometimes. Here we go. Let's see what happens here. Chicago forces. He knew he was getting that ball. Atomic ends up missing, but that's fine. Oh, that's lucky. Okay, so this all starts right here. He does throw himself out of the play, but it's fine, honestly. JNaps will take possession here. Now, I think he ends up rushing this possession. Because right here, this honestly should have been a lot cleaner of a possession. He ends up putting it in a spot where Beast Mode could actually create something out of the play. And that means Chicago, who's trying to be support, ended up not being able to support in probably the way he wanted. Right here, see JNaps with possession, so he thinks he can get behind him in time. But since JNaps rushes the possession, he can't support. It ends up being a little bit of an issue. Luckily for Atomic, though, he ends up not even having to trying to make the save. Ball gets popped up. Ball bounces out mid. Chance for JNaps. Ooh. Now to Chicago. Down to Atomic. Not able to get that one. Alright. Ball gets popped out to support. JNaps cuts in. He was applying up pressure, but he cuts in. And fantastic goal. I think this is the goal that most people talk about when they're looking at Atomic in this series. Get that final goal. A brilliant goal. But I do want to see why JNaps was initially mid here. Oh, he kind of just lands here. And then he's already in front of the ball, so I see why he did it. And then he turns in, cuts it. So honestly, yeah, that was a really good play. That was a good play. Now, if JNaps drove from his side of the pitch all the way upfield to do that, that would, of course, been a really big issue. But he just was kind of already there. Passes it mid. Off the ceiling. And goal. So there we go. At least when it comes to Atomic, he definitely doesn't have the same individual mechanical skills as, say, JNaps or Chicago, for example. Now, G2 do have one more save here. Of course, Atomic's just trying to waste down the clock. Beast Mode keeps it up. Let's see if there's an issue of someone forcing high too early. Nah, just a shot. Chicago gets the save. All right. So I think we've confirmed a lot of the issues that we saw in the group stage. And a lot of people are wondering, why am I even looking at the group stage if there's a playoff? Well, we have to see, like, what are their biggest issues. And right now, I think we've confirmed that. So Chicago, I still saw tendencies of this, but he definitely fixed that out in regards to turning mid when he shouldn't have. But I think Chicago fixes rotation for the most part. So we'll look at the semifinals and grand finals to see if it comes back. But we confirmed JNaps' mistakes. He forces high too early. Sometimes he forces low. And then basic mechanical touches under pressure for JNaps tends to be a bad thing. And then for Atomic, he tends to want to cut into the play too early, which slows down his team rotation. Now, this is a very small issue, but honestly, it's the only issue I've seen from Atomic so far. So, overall, really solid stuff. So now, everybody, we're going to look at one semifinal game. Of course, they did end up sweeping Optic, but it's good to see if there's any tendencies that come back here. Anybody in chat, anyone have a preference on what game you would want to see from the Optic G2 series? And then after this, we'll go on to the grand finals. But overall, I hope you guys have enjoyed this stream so far. Tomorrow we will be going over Falcons. So if you guys are also a Rule 1, if you guys are a Rule 1 fan, I will be looking at the Rule 1 versus Falcons series, of course. Game 2? Okay, sounds good. Let's look at Game 2 versus Optic. Here we go, semifinals. Now, I haven't looked at Optic much this split. I will fault to that. I haven't looked at Optic much this split. But we should still be able to basic tell their playstyle at least. We definitely see... Okay, demos on G2 picked up a lot against Optic, so maybe that was a game plan change they came into from the V1 series. And then they're also avoiding demos really... Oh, excuse me. Never mind. Chicago is not avoiding demos really well, but he's also getting demos, so maybe a lot of his demos were actually double demos, so we'll look at that. And then normally Reddles has higher... Ooh, Reddles actually didn't have a lot of demos in this series, though. That could be why Optic weren't playing as well. Boost-wise, boost amounts look okay. It looks like G2 are actually a little low on boost. And Optic are actually... They don't have boost at all, so that's a really big issue on the boost side of things. But, without further ado, let's look at Game 2 of G2 versus Optic. Here we go. Okay. So the player I want to be looking at for the most of this game is I'm going to be looking at Chicago. We looked at JNAPS a lot last game, so we'll look at Chicago this game. See if Chicago does have any of those glaring issues we saw, especially in the group stage. Here we go. We're supporting. Loses the 50. He rotates behind his teammate. Now, let's see if he keeps possession here. Great possession. I really like what he did there. Now, Atomic ends up not being able to avoid the demo, but JNAPS fills in really well. Here we go. Ball back over. There we go. Great demo. Here we go. There we go. He's going to fill in. So this is a really good... So I did talk about last game where Atomic tended to cut in when he didn't need to. This is a good cut into a rotation. So what Chicago's doing here, he's keeping in mind that we always want someone on the ball, someone supporting, and then, of course, someone applying off-ball pressure, or at minimum... just filling in the line behind his two teammates, which in this situation, no one's on the ball. So Chicago uses his time as he goes from the guy applying off-ball pressure to filling in the ball guy position, since that's the higher priority. JNAPS will fill in second, and Atomic will find him behind him, or maybe Atomic will fill in, JNAPS fills in behind him. Doesn't really matter as long as somebody's filling in support. And that's why this is good. Whereas Atomic, he was cut, like, let's say JNAPS is air dribbling this ball. Atomic, in the last game, was cutting in when his teammate had a pretty free ball. Whereas this time, Chicago is just filling in the fact that no one on his team's going for the ball. And he keeps a really solid possession as well. I mean, that honestly could have been a double tap. So this should have been, honestly, I think this could have been an even scarier opportunity for G2. There we go. Ball gets popped out. He's going to fill in second behind Atomic, so that's good. Ooh. This, I guess JNAPS called him off. I guess that's fine. But still, as you notice, it now created a moment in time where Chicago is now useless. Now you're probably like, why can't Chicago go for a demo, for example? Well, one, JNAPS is most likely about to become the demoer. But two, we talked about it in the previous replay as well, where when we're applying, but where we don't want to go from the other side of the field to go for a demo, because one, we're going in the same direction as our opponents, so we're most likely not going to get demos anyway, but we're also going into the same direction as our teammates, right? Which is something that's bad to do. So JNAPS cutting in for this, I know JNAPS had a better approach on the ball here, but it looks like Chicago does get lost whenever a pass doesn't come mid. So I think we can solidify Chicago's main issue. Oh, excuse me. Go back to here. I think we can solidify his main issue is we can add on to it. He tends to go mid when it's not his turn, which ends up making him useless to play. We can also put on a, and if a pass doesn't come in, he doesn't know where to go. Both examples and end up making him useless to the play for some amount of time. So that's something we're starting to solidify G2's main issues, I think. We're finally starting to understand G2 Esports' main issues individually and as a team. As a team, they honestly don't have any issues. As a team, their rotations are really strong. They understand the importance of possession. They also understand, they're also able to they're great at recognizing when the midfield's open for a pass. Their only weaknesses are actually on their individual skill themselves. Their ability to be aware of where their teammates are. Or maybe they fill in rotation too early, or they make touches that make it, or they do touches that make the game harder on themselves, and they're already mechanically not as good as, say, some other pros. And just small giveaways of possession from those missed mistakes, double committing, etc. Like, if we look, like, when we look at Liquid's mistakes, we look at it's their rotation, their ability to adapt to situations as a team. Really bad. This is a rotational mistake. But when we look at G2's weaknesses, all their mistakes are individual. And that's something that's really big to keep in mind. And I can't wait to look at Falcons, because most people consider Falcons as probably some of the best basic mechanic players in the world. So honestly, when we watch Falcons tomorrow, I'm expecting it to actually be their rotations that could be amped up a little bit. I want to switch over here to Atomic. We haven't really seen Atomic a lot, so we're gonna stick to Atomic here for a bit now that we've solidified some more mistakes from Chicago and JNAPS. There we go, Atomic. He's going to play ball guy here. I want to see him apply some off-ball pressure. He gets the boost steal. Why does he rotate back here? Okay. Yeah. Okay, I understand why Atomic went back here, but I still say this is a little bit too early, because Chicago's already going back. And like we talked about earlier in this stream, we always want someone on the ball. We want someone supporting. And we want someone applying off-ball pressure. So right here, he probably sees Chicago's really far away from the ball, and he thinks he needs to come back, but G2 honestly have a lot of time here. Yeah, that's exactly what yes, Bluky, I completely agree with that. Falcons, they tend to not do many things out of the ordinary. I think they are, when I talk about Falcons, I think they're the team with the highest floor in the world. And the main reason for that is because they're very structured. They love doing, they support behind each other really well. They don't look for a lot of passes. They still do have some passes, but they're more of these passes where someone's rotating out and they pass it across as like a blindside pass to the other team. But that's normally the only pass we really see them going for, or maybe a pass upfield where, like, if someone's in front of them, they pass up to them. But even then, they're just going to fill in behind. It's still a very structured idea. Yeah, the perfect vertical stacking moment I showed you. Exactly. But, for example, like, when we look at G2 here, I think Atomic, he just saw Chicago's far away from the ball. Maybe a misread on how scary the situation was, because he honestly didn't need to rush back. I would have loved to see maybe Chicago not go for this boost, but grab pads and fill in support, and then Atomic continue to apply off-ball pressure. That way we have all three areas of the field being covered again. So, a little bit of an individual mistake here on Atomic in regards to just knowing that he didn't need to rush back to support here. But, of course, that is an understandable mistake. He saw Chicago rotating far away from the ball. But at the same time, you normally don't want... You still want to make sure the rotations are clean. But here we go. So, we've seen this a couple times for JNAPS, where he's, as third man, been blind to what's in front of him. Like, he doesn't know if someone's watching. This is a very useless aerial, and ends up being bad for his team. What would have been better for here is JNAPS is like, since he has low boost, what would have been better for JNAPS is just for him to go. Like, let Atomic take possession, go for some off-ball pressure, which would have allowed him to rotate out at this point while Atomic applies off-ball pressure, and he would support Chicago. But since he goes for that kind of useless touch, it ends up being a goal. And again, that's just adding to the individual side of things for JNAPS. So we talked about forcing high too early. We talked about basic mechanical mistouches, but now we're also seeing... And we saw this earlier in the other replays as well, but I didn't think it was that big of an issue. Where JNAPS plays ball over his job on occasion. An example, instead of applying off-ball pressure, just waits for the ball while in front of it, which minimizes his individual potential. There we go. We're continuing to rack up on the individual things for G2. But when it comes to rotations, honestly, I'm not seeing any mistakes on rotations. Like, big rotational. I think G2 understand how to rotate for the most part. But, again, that's why, like, I feel bad for, like, a coach like Sathu, Or like, how do you tell your team, how do you tell your players that individually you just aren't as good? And like I said, G2's rotations are really, really good. So since G2's rotations are really good, you don't really want to change them just to make up for their lack of mechanics, right? So it's just like, literally, what do you say to your players? Hey, get better individually. The G2, they know the midfield's open here. Now, let's see what he does here. Not the best of 50s. And actually, the G2's mechanical issues go all the way back to the Season 7 World Championship as well. We talked about how against BDS, G2 weren't hitting their shots, but they still had all the passes, the pressure, and everything like that. Maybe their defense was a little bit lackluster, but so was BDS's, if I'm being honest. But G2, every time they got a really good pass, they just beamed it off the post. They hit it off the crossbar, right? This actually goes all the way back to the Season 7 World Championship, where they were kind of missing their shots. They were missing their shots on target, but as well, they were losing pretty much every 50, but in a bad way. If you lose a 50 to your teammate that's behind you, that's not a bad idea, but they were losing the 50 and giving away possession against Vitality. Like, G2's individual mistakes is not a new thing. This has been a thing since Season 7. And then back in Season 6, Season 5, Season 4, they honestly had the mechanics. Maybe you wouldn't consider them as mechanical as, say, Garrett G or Squishy back then. But you'd still consider them very mechanical teams. So it just goes to show that sometimes the weaknesses of a team transcend rostered moves. Because honestly, when Chicago came on to G2, people were like, he's super, super mechanical, super, super speedy. But even then, some basic mechanics still weren't there for him, like the 50-50 game against Vitality back in Season 7. But honestly, I've really, I mean, we've only done we're only 2 days in to this deep dive analysis of teams, and we're learning a lot about all these different teams. So the big question mark for G2 is how will they perform at this LAN? At all the North American LANs, G2 have looked consistent mechanically, and their rotations have been good. At the European LANs, their rotations have looked consistent, but their mechanics weren't solid. They weren't confident in their mechanics. So the big question on how well G2 will do at this LAN is, mechanically, how will they do? How confident will they be individually going into this LAN? And normally in North American LANs, individually they're looking confident. So that's why I do have G2 doing really well in the initial predictions, because now that we have a decent amount of people here, I did make an initial predictions for how I think the major will go with based on my current understanding of teams. And then when we're done analyzing all 16 teams, we'll make a second prediction to see how well we think these teams are going to do now that we've done all the analysis. So right now, for me, my Liquid notes pretty much solidify Liquid losing in the first game because they're kind of inconsistent rotationally, to a ground zero that's actually fundamentally, by my understanding, very, very solid, and defensively very solid. But then they come back, they warm up into it, and they're able to win their next 2 games really well. And then G2, this is completely based off of, at North American LANs, G2 tend to be very confident mechanically. And so we have G2 beating Crew, beating G1, and then they narrowly beat FaZe, because G2, they just haven't lost to FaZe on LAN, right? So far, my initial predictions, based on my understanding of G2 and Liquid, are doing well. But of course, some teams I don't actually I haven't watched a lot. So Vitality, I haven't watched a lot of them. Teams like Oxygen, I also haven't watched a lot of them, but Gen G, Complexity, Pioneers, Secret, Crew, even G1, I do have a decent understanding on them as well. But that's why, like, G2, if they're mechanically or on point, I can see them making a run. But of course, I'm only basing that off of North American LANs. They tend to be a lot more confident. But here we go. Let's see how G2 get their second goal here. Up for this one, and okay. Looks like, okay, just a bad mechanical play from Optic there. But G2, that's why their rotations are so good. If they're playing against a team that has anything rotationally off, or a team makes one big mistake, G2 will capitalize it because how good their rotations are. So again, we're seeing that come into fruition. And then G2 are just taking their time. But yeah, I think we finally have a really good understanding of how good G2 are, as well as what their weaknesses are. Because if I'm being honest, like I said at the very beginning of this stream, the team that has the least amount of weaknesses is normally the team that will win. Like, some people say, like, the team that's stronger than another team will win. That's not necessarily the case. In Rocket League, it tends to be whatever team has the least weaknesses, rather than the team that has the strongest play. That's why, looking back at, say, RLCS with BDS compared to North American teams, when it came to glaring weaknesses, BDS looked like they honestly had a lot of weaknesses, but their strengths were really, really high. Whereas North American teams were fairly different at the time. North American teams seemed fairly confident in their play. They seemed to have a lot less weaknesses than European teams, but at the same time, they didn't look as strong as BDS when BDS were at their peak. And that ended up getting shown to us. BDS looked like they were playing at their, like, during the fall major, BDS looked like they were playing at their ceiling. And EU teams tend to have way higher ceilings than North American teams, whereas North American teams tend to have higher floors than other teams. But here we go. Now we're going to be looking at 2 or 3 games. Is there any game that we want to go over first from this grand final? Anyone have a preference for what we want to go over from this grand final? I don't mind either way. I think no matter what games we look at here, we'll get some good information. Game 4. Okay, so we'll look at Game 4. That's something we can definitely do. So here we go. No, 5. Okay, so of course we'll go over the final game. I do want to save the final game. So it's outside just the last game. Is there any game that we want to look at? Because don't worry, we will look at the final game. But is there any preference on the first 4 people want to look at? If the timeout is on Game 4, that means the next game after the timeout, right? Yeah, so the timeout is after Game 4. That's what it was. So yeah, I mean, you already said Game 4, so we can look at... Let's look at Game... Okay. I don't know how to speak English, but you get me? Yeah. So I think, yeah, let's look at Game... It does seem like the turning point of the series was Game 3. So I think we should look at Game 3, and then we'll look at Game 5. So I think that'll be the best thing to do. Here we go. And now that, like, I think we've pretty much we've fully found out what G2's strengths and weaknesses are at this point. We understand what the strengths and weaknesses are at this point. So now we pretty much just get to watch the gameplay and just... You guys can join along with me in noticing G2's mistakes and their strengths. So I did say Game 3, right? Yeah, that Game 3 was the turning point for this series. They lost in overtime. All right, let's go back to JNEPs. Here we go. Right off the bat, kickoff goal. Not much to say there. Just kickoff goal. We could probably analyze the kickoff. Give the good old Johnny boy take on the kickoff there, but... At the end of the day, like right now, as long as you're playing against a team, and now I will say G2 actually are known for having weaker kickoffs. If you watch Carmine Corps versus G2 at the Spring Major, the kickoffs were horrible for G2. Here we go. Ooh, this was very clean. Now I gotta see this from another POV. So, actually, Atomic does he ends up forcing a little early, and he forces low. So, that's actually a mistake that's coming up against FaZe. So, maybe it's not just the JNAPS thing. Although, that's just one mistake from Atomic. I wouldn't be surprised if that's his only mistake. Individually, anyway. Because we do have to remember, G2, they haven't won a regional since Spring Split Regional 2. Which, in last season, G2 won a lot of regionals. And they even won a regional with Drees, we have to remember, right? So, like, G2 were known for winning regionals last season, and now they haven't won one since Spring Regional 2. And to be fair, they were 1 goal off of winning Regional 3 as well, but AJ peaked on his shot. Here we go. Solid off-ball pressure. JNAPS loses the ball back. He fills in support. I think we are starting to solidify that Atomic does tend to fill in rotation a little bit quick. Do you think they're going to win a regional? I think if G2 are going to win a regional, they're going to win Regional 2 of the Spring Split or Regional 3 of the Spring Split. I don't think they're going to win Regional 1, but I think it is possible. I think they will. I think they can win a regional, but it's definitely, they still have to continue to work on that. If they're working on their mechanical consistency, I definitely can see them win. Or maybe they can get a fear factor. Let's say G2 win the Winter Major. I can definitely see them gaining a little bit of a fear factor and winning. But now that Gen G's in North America, they seem to not be afraid of any team, kind of like a lot of European teams are. So I honestly don't expect the fear factor to help out G2 as much as it did last season. Yeah, it's great that we get to watch, just straight up watch the game now. We're able to fully see G2's mistakes, point them out, looking at their strengths. Because rotationally, G2, whenever someone makes a mistake, they fill in for each other. And honestly, maybe the lack of G2's mechanics is the reason why the rotations are so good. Maybe subconsciously it gets them to all fill in for each other very, very quickly and efficiently. You know, through that trial and error over time, they've just gotten so good at filling in rotations that now their rotations overall are good. But now it's at the point where if they can improve their mechanics, improve their individual smarts, then G2 will be at the top. And I know I'm using big terms like individual smarts or just individual mechanics. So just to let y'all know what my definitions for those are. Individual smarts is your ability to read the game. It's your ability to understand small things like forcing high, but making sure when you force high, you don't force high too early, right? So in terms of defense, it's also awareness. Know where your teammates are, know where your opponents are. Those are all individual smarts. And when it comes to mechanics, it's just how consistently can you take the ball from point A to point B without missing. G2 mechanically are worse than some of the top teams in North America and Europe. And also, in terms of the smart side of things, sometimes they do have issues forcing high. Sometimes they misread where their teammates are. They're not aware of where they are. But rotationally, when they do know what's happening, they are the best team in the game rotationally. And I would never hesitate to say that. Rotationally, I think G2 are the best team in the game. But individually, I think in terms of at least the major teams, in terms of their peak mechanics, I'd say they're probably one of the lowest teams at the major. I think Secret have a higher ceiling than G2 mechanically. I think even teams like KCP have a higher ceiling, or at least, yeah, a higher ceiling than G2. I think G2 definitely have a higher floor mechanically than a team like KCP. But when you look at the ceiling of mechanics, I would not hesitate to say, I would say mechanically at their ceiling. The only player on G2 that at their ceiling of mechanics that is probably better than KCP is Atomic. I know that probably sounds like a big take, but for me, it's just the ceiling. You never see teams at the ceiling of their mechanics. There's a reason why OCE teams tend to be less consistent than NA and EU, or even SAM. They're just so far away from everyone. They have a very small population. They don't get as much quality practice, right? But at the end of the day, their ceiling in mechanics still is a lot higher than a team like G2. Outside maybe Atomic. You know, I still have to give Atomic ceiling and mechanics higher than everyone else. It's just JNAPS in Chicago. Their ceiling and mechanics tend to bring the whole team down. But look at this here from... Let's see what happens here with G2. I was talking for a little bit there. Chicago. He ends up getting demoed. So we're going to watch Atomic here. He avoids the demo. Oh, he gets bumped by Chicago. Chicago can't the save, but why wasn't JNAPS able to help out at all here? Let's see. He's in front of the ball. Yeah. I guess that's just unlucky for G2. I mean, Atomic kind of just ran into Chicago on spawn. I guess you could say Chicago should have avoided the demo as well, but... And we did see at the very beginning, when we looked at the stats, Chicago did have an issue avoiding demos from FaZe, so I guess we could put that up as against FaZe at least. And that, at the end of the day, avoiding demos is also an individual skill, right? You also have to have the smarts and the awareness to avoid demos and stay in position, in position. There we go. Here we go. JNAPS. Atomic's going to fill in support. Really good pre-jump there. Really good play. This is a good read. This is why I say Atomic, at least individually, is a lot more solid than JNAPS in Chicago. He just reads the game better than JNAPS in Chicago at this moment in time. And I think, apparently, Jack, when co-commentating a Zen 1v1 pointed it out that sometimes the most mechanical players in the world are especially a player like Zen are so good at mechanics, but they're also really good at just reading the play, and probably part of the reason due to that is they themselves are super mechanical, right? They know what their opponents can do, right? That's why a player like Zen is so consistent. He is so consistent mechanically on his own, but since he's so good mechanically, he's also really good at reading people with mechanics, right? So that could explain as well why players like JNaps has issues forcing high. He doesn't read the game as well as other players. Or why he has some missed first touches. Just mechanically, he's not at the same level as a player like Atomic. Atomic, we've watched a few replays now. Atomic's only had like one bad individual smart play. And outside of that, it's just maybe been a cut too early on a rotation. But even then, that's still a minimal mistake compared to his two teammates. Here we go, though. Ball back up to Sipical. Sipical lose that 50 back. Or wins the 50, excuse me. Back over to JNaps. Atomic fills in support. Now he has to make sure he watches the force here. That's really good from Atomic. It did seem like Chicago was out of position here, though. I do want to see from his POV. Yeah, like right here, there's no reason why Chicago should be turning for this ball, in my opinion. Like, no matter what, he's never getting to this ball in time. Atomic's already going to force for him. He should be covering the net all day here. He should be covering that support position. Let Atomic go, and if it's on target, then of course he would jump. But if it's off target, he's still at least watching the net. Free possession for him, right? Now, it looks like FaZe did mess up on their shot there a little bit. But it still goes to show some issues individually from G2. But thank you guys so much for showing up to the stream, though, of course. I did think it would be enjoyable for everyone just to see, like, what are... Because I think a lot of people can tell what teams are good at. I think even people who aren't coaches and players are still able to recognize what teams are good at. But I think something that most people aren't able to recognize is... Oh, my. I think some people aren't able to recognize what teams are really bad at. Like, some people might say that FaZe sit in net, right? But to be honest... FaZe are really good at reading where the ball is going, so even if their rotations aren't as clean, individually their skill makes up for maybe a little bit worse of a rotation. So, like, at the end of the day, if their mechanics are there, it's not the end of the world. So, if the mechanics are there, it's not the end of the world if rotationally they're a little bit off. So that's why whenever we're looking at teams, it's always good to have a good basis of what you're trying to go off. Like I said before these replay reviews, I said, what am I looking? I'm looking for possession, and I'm looking to make sure teams are efficiently filling in possession, support guy, and off-ball pressure, right? With G2, they're filling it, like, rotationally, they're filling in all four of those ideas. But individually, some of their mistakes are causing, for example, we saw Chicago. He misreads how to fill in support. He doesn't know where his teammates are. So individually, he causes support to not be as strong of strong. Whereas when we looked at a Chronic yesterday, he just physically wasn't supporting his teammates. He was just really far out of the play. So that's why when we look at rotation side of things for a team like Liquid, they just don't know how to adapt and fill into a rotation when, say, a demo or something abnormal happens, right? Whereas G2, they know how to do that, but it's more their individual skill of recognizing what position they are. Sometimes that might cause them to mess up, or maybe they force low instead of high, or they jump too early. So this should be a clean possession. That should have been a possession. That's a miss from Chicago, and a miss leads two misses, lead to a goal. Now, I thought Atomic should have been able to follow this. Was he on low boost? Oh, he had boost. Well, one, he kind of jumps really early here, which is not the end of the world as long as he keeps possession. Then he just leaves it. Then yeah, I think Chicago just misreads here. I mean, at the pro level, a misread like this just shouldn't be happening. Of course, players are nervous if it's an overtime, but a pro should be expecting perfection in their mechanics, I think. Now, mentality-wise, I think the team should be like, hey, it's okay, you messed up, whatever. But if you're in a replay review, you're in ranked, you should not be happy if you're missing a ball like that if you're a pro. But there we go. That's G2. Now let's look at the final game of the series. But so far, I think with G2, their rotations definitely show consistency. Like, the rotations are so consistent, they know how to fill in with each other. It's only mechanics, right? And luckily for G2, mechanics don't mean too much on LAN as long as you're at least able to hit some shots on target. Which is why at North American LANs, when G2 are confident, that's why I think G2 will bounce back at this LAN. But that's why until G2 would continue to improve on their mechanical and individual side of things, I think at European LANs, G2 will continue to not be as solid. And if I remember correctly as well, I think the only LAN G2 played really bad at over the last few years that wasn't an EU LAN, I think was Season 6. And even then, Kronovi looked solid, Rizzo looked solid, and JNAPS honestly wasn't looking as good as he normally was. That was the only North American LAN where I remember G2 not really doing well, but Season 4, they did well, and it was a North American LAN. Season 5 was Europe, of course, and G2 didn't do good there. So yeah, I think Season 6 is the only bad North American LAN the organization has had. Right off the bat, G2 do end up scoring here. Great pass mid. Or, excuse me, a great shot, I guess. I think that's just phase. I want to look at this one. Phase. Oh, yeah. Missed backflip. Typical just... I talk about phase. I talk about G2 having no mechanics, but what happened here? He has 36 boost. Oh, he just got faked by Atomic. So that was just... you know what? That's a good play from Atomic here. Let's look at it from Atomic's POV. From Typical's POV, it does show how confusing, because it looks like Atomic may have been able to put it top left corner. So Typical, I think, was worried about that, and since he had low boost, he wasn't able to get back to it. All right, okay, that makes sense. All right, let's see. First killer through the air here. Ooh, that's just a really good play from first killer, mechanic-wise. So what causes this? So it is off the kickoff. We do constitute this as a kickoff goal. But the main issue here, so for me, when I think about Rocket League, I think of whoever's on the backboard as the last man back. So essentially that means I want whoever's in net here, which would be JNAPS, to force high. But I think what happens here, we'll go to a little bit. Ew, boy, is there any good place to... Here we go. So it's right off the kickoff. JNAPS ends up rotating, he just leaves the play. Which means Atomic is essentially in a 1v1 here against First Killer. And then First Killer was just able to get a really good shot on target, and that's why it goes in. Like, JNAPS here is useless to the play because he rotates out. Now, if JNAPS instead, off the kickoff, continue to grab these pads and instead turn towards the play, what he would have been able to do is, as Atomic covers backboard, JNAPS would have been able to force high for First Killer. But again, it just goes to show the individual side of things for G2 is their main issue. Everybody, this is the final replay. I think we're not going to learn anything new about G2's rotation. I think we found out that, for the most part, we found their weaknesses. We found individually what their weaknesses are. We know what their strengths are, individually and as a team. And we found out mainly their weaknesses are caused by their individual skill, and most of their strengths are caused by their understanding of rotation. Ooh, that was close. So everybody, if you do have any questions, so this will now be the time to ask. If you have any questions about G2 rotating overall, feel free to ask those questions now, and I'll do my best to answer them. But yeah, so far, there we go. G2, they love passing to their third man as an off-ball pressure guy. And this is what we would say G2's play style is. They love passing to their third man. But the difference between, say, Atomic as third man and JNAPS as third man is Atomic knows when he can be an option for a pass and when he should be going for a demo. I think that's the big difference between Atomic and JNAPS. And again, it just shows the individual difference in those two players. Like, everyone sees Chicago and JNAPS as the veterans, which, to be true, like, maybe they're less nervous than other players, but at least in terms of their actual mistakes, I mean, Atomic, mistakes-wise, is not as bad as JNAPS or Chicago. But thank you so much, everybody, who showed out to the stream. Looks like that's going to be another solid goal from... There we go. So Chicago. So here an issue is no one's watching mid. So this is actually looks like it's going to be a rotational issue. And it's JNAPS with the... Well, to be fair, he's on low boost. But no one's watching mid here. So let's see. Is it actually JNAPS' fault? I mean, that's the only way we can really illustrate it. We could say, well, I guess we could put it down to Chicago had a bad challenge here. Chicago could have gotten a better challenge and it wouldn't have been a goal. So that's something we can put on individual skill again. But JNaps is good as well. He's on 0 boost. Instead of rotating down the middle, trying to apply off-ball pressure to his team, he's just not doing anything for the play. So he could have maybe been there to look for a demo on a shooter, something like that. But instead, he ends up rotating out really, really wide. And yeah, I mean, if he just stayed closer to the play, if he'd stayed closer to the play, he would have been here to demo first killer, and that never would have been a goal. So on a team side of things, you always have someone watching mid. So JNaps individually making that mistake 2 times in a row has cost them goals. And then for Chicago, individually, he just has to get a little bit better at challenging the ball. I mean, that's all it is on that side of things. For example, if we go back to this challenge here from Chicago, if it was first killer in Chicago's shoes here, I think first killer would have gotten this challenge 9 times out of 10. But when it comes to Chicago, of course, we see he ends up missing that one. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Today. Remember, tomorrow we're going over Falcons. So if you are interested in MENA, we're going to be going over Falcons Esports. And in that stream, we'll be going over, we'll of course get to witness Rule 1, since, of course, the last regional of the spring split, Rule 1, ended up coming out with the dub. So we'll end up seeing how Falcons lost and what maybe their weaknesses are against a team like Rule 1. For example, when we look at the Falcons series, we're probably not going to be looking at any of the group stage matches. We're probably just going to be, if anything, we're just going to look at the grand finals for the most part. So maybe we can spend a lot of time just going over the grand finals as a whole, because that's the only real time we're going to be seeing weaknesses from Falcons. And of course, we could probably see weaknesses in another match, so maybe we'll look at like the semifinal match for Falcons, just to get an idea as to what their mistakes are. But yeah, so I honestly don't expect myself to see many mistakes from Falcons outside the grand finals. There we go. Great read from Atomic. But that's something like, here we go. If JJ is still in the chat, we saw Chicago in this situation earlier, just bang it off the backboard. But Atomic, he takes possession instead. So that is what I would want to see from Chicago in the play earlier. Here we go, though. And by the way, everybody, I will be posting these streams to the best of my ability to YouTube over the next week. I think everyone probably agree that this should be uncut. I don't know how I would cut this down, because it's just an overall analysis of how these teams work. I'm not going to shorten down anything because of it. S5 Cosmic has invited me. Wow. Here we go. Atomic. Yeah, I mean, G2, they're definitely a good team. I think as a team, they're really, really good. Individually, though, I mean, individually, they just aren't as solid as other teams. And I think that's the biggest downside to G2. And I think earlier, JJ asked if I thought, what if FaZe or Liquid had G2's rotations? I think FaZe or Liquid, if they had G2's rotations, would probably be the best team in the world for a long time to come. Because when we look at the rotation side of things for G2, they have, like 0 mistakes. We've only seen like one big rotational thing in all the games we've seen today. And to be honest, that one rotational thing could have been put down to individual, right? Because I think G2 have demonstrated they understand how to rotate, and no matter how nervous they are, they continue to rotate properly. So it's all in that individual side of things. Whereas Liquid, they're kind of the opposite. They individually were looking really solid. They still had some individual mistakes, but very, very minimal. Probably one individual mistake per player, honestly, in terms of looking at the big issues. But as a team, they didn't have a lot of adaptability, where if a demo happened or someone like Oski messed up a touch, for example, it would end up leading to them losing. But first killer, he's having a field day with that ball. Ball lost out mid. Atomic pops it up. JNaps gets the beat. First killer fakes it. There we go. But ladies and gentlemen, that's it for tonight. Thank you so much for showing up to this stream. It's been a pleasure. But now I gotta go rest my voice, because I'm gonna be commentating in 2 hours. So hope to see you guys in the Havoc Esports stream. Go to twitch.tv/Havoc Esports RL. I will be commentating the Havoc Esports Last Chance qualifier tonight. So I hope to see you all there. But until then, I hope you guys all have a great night. This is HVCLuc signing off. Remember, Falcons Esports tomorrow. And actually, I did want to sign off, but remember, I will be posting these notes when we're done with all 16 days of the stream. I will post all these to a document, make sure they're easy to understand, and then I'll be posting them to Twitter for everyone to be able to access, and hopefully you'll be able to notice their strengths and weaknesses for all these teams on land. But we're going to go over Falcons Esports tomorrow, so I hope to see you guys all there. I hope you guys all have a great night. This is me signing off one more time. Peace.